and welcome back to the channel. I am the Darklight Emissary, and this video is on some Space Marine chapters that have turned away from the Imperium. Quite a few have turned away over the millennia since the Heresy era by the time of the 41st millennium. But what I find most interesting about this topic is that several have fallen away, not because of chaos, but for their own motivations, unlike the traitor legions of the past. Of note, the artwork put together for this one is not going to be directly representative of the chapters discussed completely, because there isn't much artwork for some of the chosen chapters. So just keep that in mind as you listen. Visually, it's just going to be kind of a hodgepodge of cool imagery that is trying to stay on topic, but some of the stuff is not there for some of these chapters. I think the trope of Marines falling to chaos is somewhat played out at times, so I like to see chapters and individuals that leave the Imperium for their own reasons. And these are a few of these for you to consider. Also of note is many of these traitors have fallen from a previously loyal legion as well, is often the case in the later millennia after the Horus Heresy. And so first up we have the Brutalizers chapter. These Marines are a successor of the Imperial Fists, having been a thorn in the side of the Imperium for a long time now. Even when they were still loyal, this chapter was known for their sinister, brutal nature, as their name suggests. Its purpose, just like its namesake, is brutal subjugation and destruction of worlds, and peoples who would not submit to the Imperial authorities was kind of their modus operandi. Even for most chapters of Space Marines, the Inquisition and others, the methods employed by the Brutalizers was considered a bit too much to handle and tolerate even by those other organizations' standards. On top of this, with the Imperium becoming increasingly more religious and dogmatic about the Emperor by the day and the hour, the Brutalizers were fervent and unapologetically outspoken to say that the Emperor was not a god to anyone who challenged otherwise, setting them up at odds with many powerful organizations and individuals in the Imperium, a few of which, in this case, would be the Ecclesiarchy, the official theocratic arm of the government, and the Inquisition as well. Eventually, due to the utter devastation this chapter unleashed on worlds, sometimes not deserving of it, they were eventually shackled by a Lord Inquisitor as her personal troops on pain of complete destruction if they did not. Any sources I read do not indicate when they fell away completely, but one can imagine that being ran ragged by this Inquisitor chafed hard on their honor and personal pride. Marines normally don't fall under inquisitorial authority anyways, unless they are Grey Knights, Death Watch, or the Exorcists. Most other chapters will either fight Inquisitors or even ignore their orders if they can find a way to. Or they'll even fight Inquisitors in the case of like the Space Wolves did. Eventually, the chapter seemed to have had enough of that and either killed or broke free of the Inquisitor in general. From then on, this chapter became a renegade force of pirates and mercenaries. They seemingly still possibly believe in the Emperor, in my opinion. As a powerful figure, they are the legacy of, at least. And they have not become a chaos chapter and do not allow mutations in their ranks. In many ways, they continue much like many chapters do, but they offer their services for proper compensation, even to the forces of chaos at times. When not hired, they are a respecter of no persons and pillage the galaxy of whatever they need or want at the time. Next, we have the Soul Drinkers chapter. This chapter has quite a few books and a omnibus if you are interested in knowing more about them by the author Ben Counter. This was one of the first series of books I read growing up when getting into the lore early on, and so I do recommend it. There's some pretty great fighting and things like that in these books about this chapter. This also helps you see some of the more old school, I guess, vibe and feel of the Imperium from these older books that is a little bit lost in some of the newer material at times, it seems like. But anyways, I digress. This chapter was once thought to be founded from the Imperial Fists, but was discovered to not be the case later on in their history. But this is important to the beginning of their fall from the Imperium itself. They were in pursuit of a chapter artifact called the Soul Spear, which was a vortex weapon when activated. It could basically cut through anything it made contact with and was said to be a relic of the Primarch Rogal Dorn originally. When the Soul Drinkers finally found the location of the spear, the Mechanicus found it at the same time and claimed it first. The Soul Drinkers demanded this artifact back from the Mechanicus, who refused. This brought them into direct conflict, with the Soul Drinkers assaulting the Mechanicus vessels to claim their relic back. They were successful, however the Inquisition demanded consequences for attacking forces of the Mechanicus. One of the main leaders of the assault, Sarpedon, a psyker and librarian, was brought to the chapter master, who told him that the Inquisition was insisting that all Marines who participated in the assault on the Mechanicus be executed. If they refused, they would be declared traitorous by the Imperium and Inquisition and hunted to extinction. Sarpedon, the chapter master, ended up fighting in single combat over the future of the chapter, and during the fight, Sarpedon spontaneously grew 8 arachnid legs in place of his normal legs. With these new enhancements to his physical strength, along with his physical ability or his psychic ability, he defeated the chapter master, taking command of the chapter. Several other members of the chapter also became physically mutated, and from then on, the chapter became traitors in the eyes of the Imperium. However, it is important to note here, the Soul Drinkers were not followers of Chaos or any other entity other than the Emperor, who they still honored and fought in the name of. But they no longer believed that the Imperium was the right, true inheritors of the Emperor's authority. The Drinkers eventually discovered that a greater demon of Tzeentch, Abraxas, had laid claim to the chapter's very soul, and had weaved events to try and convince them to fall to serve the God of Change, and also was the source of their mutations as well. They had also by this time defeated the forces of Nurgle on a world, which seemed to have been influenced by this greater demon, as a test of some sort, and also to simply fight their hated opposite, that is Nurgle, that Nurgle is to Tzeentch. Sarpedon refused Abraxas, and was able to stab the soul spear into Abraxas' chest, banishing him back to the warp. And of note regarding the Nurgle attack, the Soul Drinkers thought the Emperor had told them where to find this plague world of Nurgle, but instead, turns out it was Tzeentch that just wanted to punch Nurgle in the face, apparently. So, kind of find that a little bit funny, that the Chaos Gods are playing games in that way against each other. The Soul Drinkers spent the rest of their time being rather unstable as a chapter. They had abandoned most, if not all, of their own chapter's fleet, and traveled on a gigantic space hulk, melded from many Imperial and Xenos ships, and traveled the galaxy defeating foes they felt were a threat to citizens of the Imperium, and fighting for the forces of Chaos as well. Eventually, the chapter was battered and broken after many conflicts, and not having the ability to repair and recruit new numbers in time to replenish losses, whittling the chapter down, including another schism in the chapter that almost claimed the chapter at that time completely. The Imperial Fists themselves found the Soul Drinkers and brought them to their moving space fortress, the 10,000-year-old Phalanx, for judgment of their crimes. Through events on this fortress, many revelations were made about the nature of the chapter, such as how their true heritage is unknown, for sure to be the Imperial Fists or Rogal Dorn. The chapter numbered only 2 known individuals by the end, Sarpedon and an old chapter master named Dinthios. That was a source of many of the Drinkers' issues. Sarpedon dragged their former chapter master into a warp portal, which closed behind them. The last known record of the Soul Drinkers lay carved into the walls of the Phalanx as brothers in arms by the Imperial Fists. This chapter was refounded with Primaris Gene Seed by order of Robout Guilliman. So one may speculate perhaps that Robout knows their nature, or they are Ultramarines founded to begin with, although it is not known for certain on any regard. Next we have the Integralists. This chapter is one I had not heard of before researching for this video, but they are very interesting in origin. They also don't seem to have fallen to Chaos, but simply are rogue in the Imperium at this time. Thought to be from the Ultramarines, this chapter specialized in infiltrating other chapters to investigate possible taint by Chaos or other vectors. Eventually, there seemed to be a delusion spread through their gene seed of extreme arrogance and self-righteousness. What exactly they did isn't exactly said, only that it happened during what is known as the Black Crusade of Von Malas between the 38th and 39th millennium. They had seemed to support Chaos forces in some capacity, or at least was perceived to be doing that, in some grand plan only they knew, and claimed was the right way to execute a operation. One thing of note here also is this chapter was at the direct behest of the High Lords of Terra and no other authority, which I find interesting as well. It is speculated that their gene seed had been spliced with an unknown set of other gene seed, though this is thought to possibly have been Alpha Legion gene seed, given the chapter's propensity for subterfuge and infiltration to such an extreme degree. Just like perhaps some of the Alpha Legion still believe, members of this chapter also consider themselves still loyal to the Emperor and his vision, and they do not seem to have any belief or worship of chaos amongst their ranks. Next is the Phoenix Brethren, founded from the Raven Guard and Corvus Corax. This chapter was originally known as the Flame Falcons. Just as their name suggests, members of the chapter found they had an odd mutation or ability, where randomly some of them would burst into a dazzling white flame effect, but obliterated anything too close or foolish enough to get close to the Marine at the time. Once dissipated, the Marines would return to normal. They naturally considered this some blessing or boon from the Emperor himself, but because the Imperium can't appreciate any advantage and is full of overzealous troglodytes at times, some members of the Ordo Malleus branch of the Inquisition decided this chapter needed to be purged for some unseen chaos taint. For the forces of this Ordo are the Demon Hunters. They also brought some Grey Knights with them and set fire to this chapter's homeworld. If you listen to my video on the Grey Knights, or know anything about them, to resist at all, or for weeks as it turns out in this case, that means this chapter is fairly powerful and ferocious. Perhaps this ability is part of that reason, though details of this conflict do not seem to be forthcoming anywhere. All that is known is eventually some portion of the White Consuls chapter of Space Marines also arrived to seal the fate of this chapter. Some members of the chapter did survive, however, and renamed the chapter the Phoenix Brethren in honor of their rebirth as a chapter and rising from the ashes of defeat. They have been active still as loyalists, and eventually they were known yet again for some sort of purifying flame that manifested amongst them. This reached the ear, or perhaps they were present, the White Consuls again, who decided that while they figured they knew the true identity of this chapter, they weren't going to press the issue. This could possibly be because they were valuable in combat, and the Consuls weren't the ones to persecute them to begin with anyways. It can also be because they are allies with one of the Dark Angel successor chapters, and no one wants to risk the wrath of the Dark Angels en masse. One last note about this chapter is they are one of the few who see the Emperor as God, and not just as the pinnacle of humanity. They believe their ability could only come from the blessings of a god. And just as a small addition to this, and the final group I will talk about since they are allies of the Phoenix Brethren that I found researching, are the Lost Sons. This isn't so much of a chapter as it is a warband, but their nature is unique and interesting. They are made up of Marines from many chapters of lost or fallen natures. Many of these Marines have spent millennia trapped in the Eye of Terror. Eventually, this band of Marines came across a living saint of the Emperor, also trapped in the Eye, and they devoted themselves to protecting her. And eventually they got out of the Eye of Terror into real space. They were then confronted by Grey Knights, and Kaldor Drago, future Supreme Grandmaster of the Grey Knights himself. Drago probably would have executed these Marines as taint lost causes had it just been them, but the saint with them demanded that they were clean, and one of the leaders of the Sons, Andreas Solar, demanded he be allowed to take the trials the Grey Knights put anyone through to test their purity in the eyes of the Emperor. While it isn't elaborated on, apparently the Emperor was indeed watching over this band, because a custode arrived with orders from the Emperor himself to allow Andreas to take the trials. Against Drago's expectations, Andreas succeeded in surviving the trials, thus granting the Sons an exemption from execution. However, to this day, they are still watched doggedly by that secretive chapter. And I have to share a funny aside about Solar Andreas himself, or Andreas Solar, as his name is, I believe. He had talked about being lost in the Eye of Terror and having gone insane. And he said that, being insane ended up not being useful So he went back sane again. And so I can just imagine in a deadpan way that he just will say that to your face, you know, completely straight-faced, in sort of a humorous way. I just thought that was kind of funny. A few of the other leaders of this warband are possibly a fallen Dark Angel, and a member of the Ultramarines, or one of their successors originally. All these Marines form a unique alloy of creeds, fighting styles, and talents. I find that sort of melding always interesting in these situations. These Marines kind of reminded me of a Black Shield organization during the Horus Heresy, which was like a mix of either traitors and loyalists, or, you know, Marines of unknown Legion origins who would, you know, maybe wear the Eye of Horus, but also had like an Imperial Fist insignia somewhere. So like, you know, their identities sometimes were anyone's guess. And that is a brief overview on a few Renegade chapters in the 41st millennium. I hope you enjoyed learning about a few of these. I did too in this. And as always, please like and subscribe for more of my content. There's already quite a few videos out on either any of the 18 legions, and their Primarchs, some xenos species, things like that. Leave a comment about something you liked, disliked, or a request for new content in the future. Bring your light into the dark places, and I hope you have a great day or night wherever you are. Thank you.